Okay, so we are in, I'm going to maximize this. So we're in CAD. What you're seeing here is just a trace that I did of a component of Barcelona using a Google Map site plan, just to start to show some of the different kind of layers of detail at certain scales that you'll want to consider as you're embarking on improvement of the site plan drawings for next week's upload, but also just in general. Sometimes it's enough to just have, as we were seeing in some of those regional maps, very zoomed out, just the outline of the building itself without any other detailed information, and then ultimately that in the final drawing may become a black shape or a gray shape. Sometimes though you want to know or understand roofscape situations. Maybe there's gabled roofs that you're seeing, or a particular a dome or a landmarked piece of the building that shows up in the plan that you'll want to make sure is detailed, or a series of skylights or roof objects that just give the drawing just a little bit more kind of visual interest and kind of layer, that when we get into some of our other programs and start to post-process this a little bit, there's just a little bit more info there to color the drawing with. So let's go ahead, and I think if we go into our layers here, image background, let's see, I'm assuming that's going to have a broken situation for everybody, but let's try to turn that on. So in mine, because it was from my main Dropbox, an image of Barcelona shows up. Is that the case for everybody else, or is there a broken link when you turn that layer on? Broken link, okay. So we should be able to relink it using the XREF situation that we've looked at in the past, XR. And my screen is frozen. Oh, it should be the only layer that was turned off, the image background layer, I think the red one. It did come up for you? Oh, that's interesting. It might be the way that your Dropbox is mapped on your computer drive. In either case, you should be able to go to XREF, and there will be a broken link for the JPEG that's there. And what we'll want to do is, I think we can ignore the Barcelona map. We'll want the Barcelona zoomed in. So let's just, if this Barcelona map JPEG is showing up there, you can either unload it or detach it. It doesn't matter, just so that it's not in the drawing at all. But the Barcelona zoomed in link, let's go to the saved path detail, and we can relink it to where you guys have the drawing, where you downloaded it. So save path, click on the little triple dot on the side, and then just navigate to, obviously mine's already linked, so I don't want to relink it, but it presumably would be in your downloads folder, or if you've just pulled it right from Dropbox, navigate to the location that you have that, and I guess just for the sake of showing it here, should be in my downloads folder. In this case, my in-class map or in-class tutorial. So I'm choosing that Barcelona map zoomed in. I'm clicking open, and what should happen is that should repopulate the map for you. Yes, question?
Oh, sorry, my computer went crazy and I have to restart it.
Ah, shoot. Okay, no worries. Well, I'll talk slowly.
How do we get those? Where's the image supposed to be?
So the image.
And we go to path or attach?
So if you go to the external references menu, so XR, when you have the Barcelona map zoomed in, clicked, there should be a saved path line that's live.
Down at the bottom?
Down kind of middle of the readout, yeah. Like above color system, color depth, pixel width.
Okay. 3 dots.
And then click that area and click the 3 dots to the right, and then that should bring up, it's basically asking you where do you want the new link for the file to be from. Is everybody able to relink that okay? Is that working? Or is it's not looking exactly how?
What do I do at that point?
So at this point you choose Barcelona map zoomed in, have that selected. It's not popping up immediately? All right, let me just take a quick look. Is the file type files of type as all image files? Okay, so you'll have to, in my case, I had navigated to my downloads folder where I had put the image. So you'll just have to navigate to, if you pulled it from Dropbox, if you gotcha, okay. If you download it from Dropbox, and then that should go by default to your downloads folder on your desktop or in your users folder, and then you should be able to find it there.
Well, while people are loading that up, is there a process that once you do Google Earth capture or satellite capture, when you bring it into AutoCAD to ensure the scale is correct? Because I was learning this yesterday, but just so that we all know it.
Yeah. Well, so the simplest way to do it is to just make sure that you have Google's handy graphic scale, which is located on the lower right of the image, still cropped, not cropped. So you pull that in, and then basically it's a similar exercise to what we had done in the first week with scaling of the Barcelona Pavilion plan. Obviously, at a site scale of of some of the scales that we're going to be looking at, like it won't be as exact as when you're way zoomed in, but that's okay. The tolerance can be fairly loose for that. But there are other ways to scale drawings coming from Google Earth or from Google Maps into CAD, but that honestly is the easiest way. Just have a Google should always have at the lower right portion of a scale that you make sure you pull in.
Conversion. So when you go into scale, it's like if you do 1 to 1250, you have to convert to 1250.
No, so
that's what I wanted clarity.
Gotcha. So we can go through that too. So the 1 to 1250, the 1 to 2500, that's an absolute. That's a drawing units to drawing unit scale. So
It's not to inches.
right. So it should be able to be across the board as long as you've scaled the information in the model correctly. We would be able to go to our viewport, say at 1 to 2500, and it'll be it should be correct. So we can go through what you may have noticed, and what I probably should have clarified a little bit more is these scales that I was describing in the email are not inherently in the viewport list of preset scales. You can create any scaled viewport that you want as a custom. It's at the bottom of that list. We'll go through that in a second. But basically, all right, I'm going to start to move forward a little bit, but we'll be in CAD for a few minutes. So if you're still looking for your drawing or downloading it or restarting, that's okay. But so what you'll notice here is, like I said, I've traced the general outline of the main buildings. Here's the Barcelona Pavilion here. Kind of a quick outline of some of the trees without a high level of detail. Just a quick. I was just using the spline command to create a shape, and just holding Shift, kind of free form drawing it, adding a bunch of control points, and then closing it, kind of generally along the shape of some of these clusters of trees. Also, so a quick thing, just as a visual reference, as you're dragging, when you have the underlay on a dense drawing like this, you'll notice that it generally will go black. That can be an advantage to kind of have you quickly check what information you've drawn versus what still needs to be traced. If you just hold down your scroll, if you're within the pan command, it will just let you see just the drawing information. A quick way to reference the live vector work that you're working in. But so again, as you see, like I have not been super meticulous with the amount of tracing accuracy outside of the building footprint itself for some of these support buildings. Just started to identify various elements on each building roofscape that are visually interesting to a degree, give a little bit of scale and breakdown to some of these larger masses that are hard to understand without the understanding of some roof bays or structure, or in this particular case, like this Barcelona block, which has a courtyard in the middle of it, and it has a sequence of kind of weirdly shaped buildings around the perimeter. Identifying the block perimeter as one line weight and then the interior as another just gives it a little bit of legibility. So, like I said, I didn't, just trace some of these buildings in the window of time that I had. By no means did I trace everything, but knowing that using my scales that I had set up, knowing that within the 1 to 2500 viewport that I made, that's the extent basically of what I was going to be seeing. I didn't need to necessarily trace anything outside of it. So there's a little bit of a kind of a feedback loop that you have to create for yourself. Say we go to Google Maps and look for Barcelona, just to give you a sense of where we pulled this from. So I'm assuming that everybody is fairly familiar with Google Maps at this point in our millennial digital lives. You can toggle between the kind of graphic readout of the map and the satellite in almost every case for the sake of, oops, what's going on here? Oh, it was just taking a second. In almost every case for the sake of what you're going to want to be doing, you'll actually need both, but oftentimes the satellite image is more useful. So we can be a little bit more specific than we were. We could say Barcelona Pavilion. It should zoom in right on it. There it is. So you can kind of see, in this 3D representation of these different buildings, some of the ones that we were just looking at in the screen capture that we had. But so I could have zoomed out further if I needed to. Say we were working at a regional scale like some of those maps earlier. I'd need to see more, kind of north-south than I had in my drawing. But for the sake of kind of the resolution that I wanted to be working at, I wanted to be, closer to this kind of scale or this scale. And again, you can kind of register where the drawing resolution shift takes place when the scale at the lower corner shifts. So it's at 500 right now. Suddenly now it's 200. I think we've gained a degree of resolution when we zoomed in there. And as you zoom out, obviously, it becomes, once we rasterize this image or print screen or whatever you've done to export it, it's going to be blurrier if we were working at this scale. So it's finding that right middle ground for the scale that you want to be working at, understanding quickly, again, like the viewport, beyond just the base information, right? Like, what are you actually going to be seeing? And try to be efficient in tailoring the detail work to that specific viewport, right? You don't need to draw all of this in a high level of detail. So let's go to one of our viewports here really quickly. So these viewports have already been created in my case to mimic the 3 suggested ones from the assignment, but to kind of extrapolate the point about creating your own custom viewport, let's just double click on the 1 to 2500 viewport so that we're in the active viewport, we're zooming in and out, and we go down to our scale of selected viewport sub option, and you'll see that those viewports that are in the tabs here are at the top of the list. They, in other files that you will open, and probably in your baseline, those viewports did not exist. So at the very bottom of this list of preset viewports, there's a custom viewport button. You click custom. And then basically what you can do is you can edit any of the existing viewports to be another scale. But I would suggest actually just creating a new one so that you don't mess with something that AutoCAD has preset. So we can go to, you can see that right now too, it's reading, it's telling you what the readout of each scale is. So 1 paper unit equals 500 drawing units, 1 paper unit equals 1250, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a 1 inch equals 500 feet. It is actually, all right, 1 foot equals 500 feet. 1 inch equals 500 inches. It's absolute, or it's relative rather, depending on whatever metric system you're in. Okay, so let's say we want to add a new scale. We say add, and a name appearing in scale list is what it will read out on your screen or on the pull down menu when you make it. So let's make one that's 1 to 5,000. And then we'll go down here and we have to make sure that the scale properties are 1 paper unit to 5,000 drawing units. and then that will show up in the list. And you can move it up or down the list depending on where you want it. If we were being really, clean here, we would move these ones down to be in the order of the other 1 to X systems that are already preset. But for now, we'll just leave it at the top. So I'll say OK. This won't immediately change the drawing scale that I'm in. It just created a new option for me. So now if I were to zoom in, or double click rather on this viewport and go to my viewport scale, that 1 to 5,000 scale has been made. And if I click this, it should zoom out, right? So we were at 1 to 2,500 before. If I'm double clicked there, you can see that's twice as large. So 1 to 5,000 starts to be at that town, city, not quite regional scale, but almost more of a map than a site plan, right? It's more about, again, the solid and void, the poché versus the open space. At a scale like this, you can get away with more abstract, less accurate kind of traces of things. If you do have access to GIS data, it's more powerful as you're kind of zoomed out, and you can see this whole expanse of urban or rural information. So that's how you create a custom viewport. And I apologize if that was unclear in the directive for the assignment this week. But so I'm going to zoom back in just to 2,500 here for the sake of right now. And you'll even notice here, like, if my viewport, if I were to have a vertically oriented, a portrait-oriented 11 by 17, I probably sized my map export a little bit small if I wanted to fill that whole space up. But I think that's fine. I think what we'll do is we'll just, we can keep empty space there for now because we're going to add some more information to it when we come into another program. So you can see here, 1 to 1250, we double in scale. 1 to 500, we're even closer. And the 1 to 500 or 1 to 200, depending on the scale you're building. Or potentially a little bit more zoomed out, 1 to 700 or 1 to, it's all somewhat relative to whatever your project is. But at that scale, you should be mostly on kind of the immediate vicinity of your project. And maybe the implications of a few adjacent buildings or landscape that's nearby, or terrain. But you're at a scale like this, things that you generally would want to, or that you might emphasize are, obviously how is your project associated in immediate proximity to its neighbors? Is it, if you're working with these 3 scales, that we're talking about now, you've probably already registered for the viewer at your 1 to 2,500 scale that this is located in, an urban center or in a rural area, right? So the kind of simple comparison of density is more useful kind of at these larger scales, or say that there is a large grand boulevard or a train line nearby or a bus route or something, or a particularly busy road that actually gives you access to your site. Or maybe there's like a pilgrimage path, a walking path or something that extends further out and connects, a little bit further away to a point of public transit or something. To me, those would be things that would begin to be interesting to start to note or show or think about in a list of stuff that you'd want to emphasize kind of at the larger scale. How do I get to my site? Is it difficult to do so? Are there multiple modalities of transport that get me there? Are there large built or natural landmarks nearby? What's the sort of natural landscape versus the building fabric? These are questions that I think you should try to answer at a scale like 1 to 2,500. Even 1 to 1,250, it's kind of like in that middle ground where, if we're talking about our building site here, there's still a good amount of other building information around. This starts to get a little bit more detailed. You start to understand maybe the fabric of the immediate kind of plaza space that's near the pavilion itself. At a scale like this, you may have to start to think about maybe detailing the groves of trees in a little bit more detail, because you can actually see, all right, there's actually a little cluster here, a little cluster here. It's not just one big shape like I've made. And then in particular at 500, you'll probably want to be adding in an attempt at, all right, it looks like there's a tree here, there's maybe 5 here. Let's maybe start to individually articulate some of those. Because again, you're zoomed in, you're seeing more detail. It breaks down If that detail is lacking, it falls apart faster. I mean, even at this scale, frankly, we could start to add in, parapets, like the detail around the edge of this building. Maybe there's an offset of a foot because of the parapet. Or in the case of the pavilion itself, there's probably some roof details that at a slightly higher resolution we can start to highlight a little bit. So again, it's just this combination of working with a few different scales of map. You can import all of those into CAD or into RHINO, and do a tracing exercise or use those to kind of highlight what things you want to emphasize. Has everybody been, if you've done a tracing exercise for Studio or for this class, was everybody doing it through CAD to this point? Has anybody used RHINO yet to do that? Okay, you have, great. Okay, that's great. I intentionally didn't show us how to do that in the first couple weeks of class because I wanted, at least from this class, I wanted there to be kind of an emphasis on CAD for the start of things, for 2D work. RHINO can do 2D work as well. Obviously, RHINO is much more powerful doing 3D work. But for example, just so that everybody has knowledge about this, let's open up RHINO. And like I said, we're gonna bounce around a little bit today to try to cover a few different workflows here, and then even more so next week. We're going to start to dig into V-Ray and rendering, an intro into rendering, and obviously there's going to be feedbacks here as we go. And I think that the basics of those first two classes, and it's also, just as an aside, it's a little bit unfortunate that just the holiday schedules at the beginning of the year here cut us off on 2 weeks, right as we were starting to get some momentum, because we would have been able to cover this. I think a video tutorial posted is one thing, but being able to do it in person is better. And so some of the subtleties of the workflow today, I just don't think would have been able to translate on a video, unfortunately. So that's fine. We'll make up ground. So if we open up RHINO, let's choose large objects inches. That's fine. Everything seems a little slow today. So in RHINO, again, similar to CAD, we have our 2D viewport here, the top viewport. I can insert a raster image into RHINO and trace in RHINO as well. The advantage in RHINO, and hopefully you're beginning to think about this, or you're coming up against the challenge of this as you start to detail the models of your buildings in 3D, bringing in section details or elevations or other information that you'll want to understand in 3D to trace in 3D space is a really useful way to use some of your research drawings and your background work to help inform some of your building precedent modeling. So we can go over that as well. But to start, let's type in picture frame. And so this is doing a similar search as what the insert background bitmap or background image underlay in CAD is. So let's choose our Barcelona map zoomed in, click open. And then it's going to do the same kind of asking for a scale. In this particular case, I could have it be rotated. I'm going to turn ortho on so that it's just straight like CAD. I'm going to get that in here. So now I have a similar image as image underlay as I can use in CAD, and I want to scale it pretty quickly here so that we can operate on it how we need to. I'm just double checking my units. So it's in inches as we chose when we came in. I'm going to turn it to feet and inches, although again, for the sake of this exercise, it matters a little bit less. I'm going to draw a polyline and just do a quick trace of our scale here. And then we'll scale this thing as we've done in the past with others. Let's make sure our OSNAP is turned on and we have end and midpoint and maybe near clicked. So we can choose these two sides, and you'll notice again that the scale function in RHINO is a little bit different as you're doing this exercise than it is in CAD. It's actually a little bit more intuitive, I think. It lets you just click two sides and then basically choose the reference point that you want, or the reference input. So in this particular case, we want to make it 200 feet. And we can double check ourselves by typing distance and just checking the length of that line. It says 200, great. So we should be good with that. So now, now I have a properly scaled map in RHINO. And I'm going to go over to my layer menu here, and I'm just going to make layer 5. Let's make that image underlay, or background image, or whatever you want to call it. We'll make sure that this is located on that layer.
Sorry, how did you scale it again?
Oh yeah.
Draw a line and then.
Yeah, so if you go polyline, draw polyline, or line, doesn't matter. Trace it over the 200. Make sure that you select both the image itself and the line. And then type scale. And then it's going to ask you for an origin point. So we're going to choose the first point on the scaled line. And it's going to ask you then either for a scale factor from there or a reference point. So in this case, we're scaling based on reference. So I'm choosing the end point as my reference. All right, now that I've had that, now that I've chosen those 2 points, I can, without clicking anything else, I can zoom out. I can just be dragging my cursor to show. I could manually resize this to a random scale. But at this point in my command line, I'll want to type in 200 feet so that it has a specific accurate measuring point. And then you should be good.
You deselected the image when you did that, right?
No, I was still in the scale. I was still in the scale command. So let's just do it once more. Yeah. So let's say it's small. We have both images, both the image and the line selected. Type scale. Type your origin point. Click your origin point. It's going to ask you for a scale factor or a reference point. So you don't need to do anything but just choose that second reference point and left click. Now that you've left clicked, without pressing anything else, you can zoom out if you need to, and just dragging the cursor allows you to, it's just showing you a preview of what this would scale to if you just left clicked again right now.
Type distance to check to see if you're accurate.
After you've typed in, with second reference point shown up here, you want to make sure that you input 200 feet to scale it properly, and then you can type distance to check it.
While
Yep.
you're still holding down left click?
No.
Go.
So you let go.
Uh-huh.
After you've chosen your second reference point, at that point you can type in 200 and then click enter, and it should go. And then you're out of the command. It's completed the steps of the command. And then to check the distance, that's a separate command. Distance measure 200. Make sense? Okay. So so now that we're in here, I mean, it's the task of tracing all of these things I'm not going to go through in a lot of detail, as it's somewhat similar to CAD. But what we could do is, like I said, make sure that our building is on layer 5, which I'm going to rename, like I said, image background or image underlay. And then if we want to, we can just lock this if we wanted to, or we could lock the layer just so that we're not moving the background image around. And again, like we've seen in RHINO, once I've locked it with the lock object button, it grays out the selection, and then I can't select it, which is good. Oh, you can just add more layers, and that's okay. So RHINO should have a default of like 5 layers in primary colors, or a range of colors. But if it doesn't, it's easy enough to make new ones here with the new layer button.
Could you show me the lock again for image?
Sure.
Yeah, how do you
Oh, you hit it and then hit lock.
Yeah. So selecting the image, I could. Let's just move the checkbox of the layer here to default real quick so we can see what's going on. So I have image underlay as the white layer here. If I wanted to, I could just lock all of the objects that are on image underlay layer. In this particular case, it's just one. So whether I lock it here or lock it here doesn't really matter. But if I
show the little lock, that's why I was asking.
I see. So it might be hidden or there's a sequence of boxes here that you can resize
Right, yeah.
that it's just out of sight.
It's just not there.
It's just
So,
not there. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just hit it from the top though.
Okay.
It's not telling me it's locked.
So if you want to add your locked layer, you go to you can go to this little wheel here, and you should be able to add in. Let's see. Oh, actually, this is showing us. I could open up other menus right now that would show up in this help box, but you should be able to toggle on. Here we go, in filters.
Okay.
If you click the filters button,
Uh-huh.
it should be as default all layers. That's interesting because then it should be able to show you all those other lines
It
that.
shows all the other ones as unlocked, just like yours. But
Mhm.
the fifth one, there is no
Is there a
lock.
checkbox next to it like that?
Yeah.
So move the checkbox up to default
Okay.
just by left clicking in that middle area there, just once. Then the lock and the light bulb buttons will be there. Basically on your checked layer, on your default layer,
Got it. Yeah.
semantically I shouldn't be calling it default because there's a layer that's called default. Yes?
Just a quick question. When you create a new layer, how do I add the image to that layer?
I'll show you that in a second. So the checked layer, any layer that's checked is you're not able to lock it or turn it off because it's saying, oh, you're drawing on that layer. There's live information that you're saying I want to go to that layer. So it won't give you that option. Yeah, that's why. So any layer that's not default checked, you can toggle on and off. So you can either lock it there and that the selection ability goes away, or we can select the object, the singular. Say I had, 3 of these in the scene. I'll say copy. And then I wanted to only lock one of them. So I could choose this and go to the lock button and say lock object. And it will just select that, just that one. If I wanted to lock all of them, I could close this layer, and then suddenly none of these are selected because they're all on that image layer.
How do I know what layer the image is on?
So if you click on the object itself and you go to properties, the little colored wheel, it will tell you basically, basic information about that layer. So what we want to do is move this to our image underlay. So basically where it probably came in is on default like this, layer default, and everything else is related to the default properties of that layer. So you don't need to pay attention to this other stuff right now. But you just go to the drop-down menu here, and then you can choose any layer that exists in your layer menu. So we'll change it to image underlay. We're good to go. So right, I'm going to lock that. And then basically what I can do is just using a polyline and the shape tools, start to draw some of these shapes if I wanted to in RHINO. Just, again, proving the point of you can do this either in RHINO or in CAD. So you might also notice that, this is obviously not, it's a skew of 90 degrees, right? So like I'm eyeball tracing this right now, but if we were to turn off our image underlay and look at this, like it's a little wonky, right? Like none of these things are actually 90-degree angles, and we're pretty sure that the building itself likely is 90-degree angles at these points, right? So a quick way to toggle your orientation in the scene to kind of draft at a quicker rate is in RHINO, you can use the C-plane. And there's a similar function in CAD that I'll show you guys. So I'm going to delete that shape that I made. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my C-planes menu. And I'm going to choose set C-plane by 3 points. Is everybody in the C-planes menu? You can find that. You could also type C-plane, and then it should come up. But basically, there's a set C-plane by 3 points. I'm going to click that. It's going to ask me for an origin point of my new C-plane. So if you guys remember from our initial RHINO forays, and I posted a video about this as well, about how to use a C-plane. Very useful. Check it out on the YouTube channel. That was from a couple weeks ago. Basically, the construction plane is the little grid that you see in each of the other drawing ports, right? So this is the construction plane, what we're seeing here. It's covered up by our map right now, but it's a C-plane, a construction plane exists in every viewport in RHINO. So it's not an absolute situation. You can move that thing around. You can reorient it to objects in the scene to help you draw, and that will become then the baseline orientation of your line work. So let's say that I want to draw, I'm noticing here that this whole plaza of buildings looks like it's all kind of on the same orientation to this axis, right? So it looks like I can get some pretty efficient drawing work done on this area if I reorient the C-plane to be 90 degrees to that. So I'm in my 3-point C-plane origin. I'm going to say, just for the sake of understanding visually where it's at, I'm just going to click it at this corner of this building here. Click. All right, so then it's going to ask me for an x-axis direction or ask for a default enter to accept. In this particular case, I want it to be, hopefully this is going to work. I want it to be basically in line with the origin point, but oriented along the building itself. So in that particular case, I was holding Shift and I just left-clicked on the other corner of this building. Then for the last thing, I wanted to click the up arrow basically, or in the positive Y direction. So this third corner for C-plane orientation. And then I'm clicking Enter to accept. So what it should have done is now if I were to say polyline, for example, and I draw a polyline with my ortho turned on, it should draw at the orientation of the C-plane, but it looks like it might have been clicking on something else in the scene. So let's retry that real quick.
There's C-plane, 3 points.
My view might have gotten messed up. So let's just All right, so here's our little tiny C-plane down here right now. I turned my map off. Yeah, let's try this once more. So C-plane. We could also, in theory, set it. You can set it in multiple different ways. It should work as we set C-plane 3 points. Let's try this one more time. Set C-plane origin. All right, so now you're seeing, maybe this showed up for you, but it didn't show up for me the first time I tried it. You're seeing the little red-green axis situation. And as I move my cursor around, it's showing it oriented differently. If I click Shift because I'm in ortho mode, I can get it to orient the right way. It looks like this is going to work. So more or less clicking here for the X, and then just in this particular case, I just want to click in the positive direction of the Y to set it. So now it should be set. And we'll try it once more. We'll try to do polyline. There we go. So now, when I'm drawing in ortho mode, my line is now oriented to this new kind of slightly off-kilter axis. So now I can, in a much cleaner way, like when we were tracing the Barcelona pavilion itself, I could quickly go around this scene. And knowing that we're at a scale that's a little bit more zoomed out, I don't need to be too concerned about how accurate my edges are, right? Just knowing that I'm drawing more confidently at 90-degree angles, and I can also use my guides to help make sure that the integrity of the whole shape is, there's no lines that are crooked or weird. So then I can go around and, again, in a more quickly and with more accuracy, draw these other shapes, right? Very useful.
Is it confusing if you have multiple C-planes? Like, can you have multiple C-planes?
So the C-plane by nature will only ever, it has to reorient. There can only be one C-plane orientation in a view. You could have your C-plane oriented different ways in different views. In fact, that's how that works by default. The section view versus the plan views versus the perspective view, the C-plane is oriented differently. So like in our drawing section views, our front and right views, the C-plane by default is oriented in space, right? Not flat on the ground. So that you can, if I wanted to draw something in this scene, just to illustrate the example here, what looks like, I'm drawing quote unquote in plan, but it's actually vertical information, right? So I'm just drawing kind of a random shape here. If I were to go back to perspective and look at that object, it's actually vertically oriented, right? Because that's based on the C-plane that was in that view. Does that answer your question? RHINO will constrict your ability to, you won't be able to draw in multiple seaplanes at the same time. You'd have to switch it.
I guess more what I'm wondering is if you have a bunch of different buildings that are all facing different directions,
Mm-hmm.
and you would want to draw different X and Y axes
Mm-hmm.
for each of them.
You in this particular case, if we're just using the kind of manual trace exercise, you would have to kind of reorient that seaplane every time you're going to switch. So in this particular case, I think my point of bringing this up was there's obviously some regularity in this portion of the Barcelona plan, and then there's very clearly complete chaos, right? Like asymmetrical kind of building situations and streets that are every which way. And in this particular case, the seaplane is less useful for like some of these areas, right? So you'd have to kind of use your best judgment, okay, this street is oriented kind of parallel to these structures here, this wall face here. Maybe I could draw, the outline of these elements using one seaplane orientation and then have to remove it as I work my way through. So it's a helpful tool, but it's not always the absolute, unfortunately.
How do you remove the seaplane points?
How do you remove them?
Yeah, so it goes back to
Oh.
normal orientation.
So you can, a very quick way to do that is just reset seaplane world to seaplane world top.
Okay.
So if we were in our top view, and actually, this is a good point to bring up. You could, to save a little bit of time with the question that was just asked before you can save seaplanes. You can save custom seaplanes that you've made. So say you're working in an intense plan like we have, and maybe there's 5 or 6 orientations that you keep coming back to. You can save those as orientation 1, 2, 3 that are yours. And then you basically can go to your named restore seaplane from the named seaplane panel. And it would allow you, let's say, for example, we wanted to save the one that we're in. I already went back to my top view, but let's reset it to 3 points. Start there. All right, so now we're in this kind of random, let's save the seaplane by name. I'm going to call this example 1. Oh, let me just save it as example. Well, so if I toggle the named seaplane panel, that named seaplane should be there, example. So it looks like I can't do a space on it, so I'd need an underscore or a dash or something. But let's say I had reset my seaplane to world top, and I wanted to very quickly get back to that preset plane, but I didn't want to have to go back through this 3-point setup and have it maybe be a little bit different than it was before. You could just go to the toggle named seaplane panel, double-click that seaplane, and it should restore it. If it doesn't restore it when you double-click it, you should just be able to click the arrow restore, and then we should be back in business with our polyline. Yeah. So this map is a little bit of an in-between, right? Because there's enough information that's just completely atypical that you wouldn't be able to use 1 or 2 or 3 seaplanes all the time, but the named seaplane thing could save you a little bit of time. Any questions so far? This is some basic stuff that I wanted to get through, and then I'd like to get into Illustrator at the very least for a good chunk of the time.
You said there was a way to reorient in CAD too?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to show next. Yep. So what I was leading to is if there's not any other big questions, let's move back to CAD briefly. I'll show you the equivalent of this, and then we can kind of put RHINO and CAD on the back burner for a second. So right, let's get back to CAD. And in my model space, you'll even notice here that my cursor is tilted because I had previously been working in a reoriented UCS is what they call it in CAD, but it's basically a construction plane. Okay, so what you can type in if you type in UCS and just click enter, it should bring up an origin of the grid that it's looking for. So basically, you could say, all right, you guys are all probably at the world as default. So if I click world here, in my case, my orientation of my cursor is going to change back to this just the white cursor that you see on your screen. There's no implication of X and Y because everything is flat and oriented 90 degrees, kind of an absolute. So if I wanted to do what I did in RHINO, I could type UCS again, or in your case, for the first time. And there's a series of different ways that you can orient it. In some cases, you can orient it to an object. Say, I have a closed shape here that I want to just orient it to immediately. I could click Object and click this, and it should reorient it to that object. You can see that the orientation changed. But that also relies on me having drawn that information, right? So if I type UCS and click World again to reset, I could also do, let's see, we could set it based on various axes. So let's say X. So specify rotation angle around the X axis. So at my baseline at 0, 0, I could, oops, I got out of it there. I could specify an angle, or I believe if I hold Shift, I could probably just in space imply an angle that I want it to go to. But let's say for the sake, let's say 45 degrees. Let's type it in. And it should change it. Oh, and it looks like that did an unintended thing. So let's see. There should be a way to do it to 3 points. Let's see here. Apologies.
I don't know how to fix it, because when we move it, you have to scale.
Yeah, there should be another option here. Well, we'll get to the bottom of this. We can loop back to this. I will look it up and make sure that I'm giving you the right info for it. But basically, it's a similar exercise as what we just did in RHINO, where you're choosing 2 points and reorienting. And then to reset, you can type UCS world. So let's come back to this. Let's actually take, it's 1:10. Let's take a 15-minute break. I'm going to get some water, and we'll reconvene at let's say 1:25. And then we'll jump into Illustrator and some of the other programs.